Hi everyone, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. I have a little bit of time to kill before I go on my Christmas walk, and I thought I'd use this opportunity to make one of the classic end of the year booktube videos, the Reading Reflections video, a reflection on my reading year 2023. I don't usually make this kind of video because it usually feels a bit redundant, a bit repetitive. But this year I've been on here so sporadically that I thought that for once it would make sense to make this video, because it's not like you are all well caught up on my reading anyway. If I had to summarize and characterize my reading year 2023 in one word, unfortunately the word would once again be meh. It's been a very underwhelming, very low quality reading year all told. And once again, it was partly my fault, but I think I've been a victim of circumstances. The problem was my commute. I have a lot of reading time every day, every week that I spend on the bus. I take 2 buses to and from work, 2 buses each in each direction, and that is almost 40 minutes of reading time that I get in every day. And I could have worked through half my library and half my physical TBR this year, except almost none of the books on my shelves are fit to be read on a moving bus. Either they are too large in the first place, too large to hold comfortably in your hand on a moving bus, or too large to fit in my backpack in the first place, or the font in them is tiny, and that is a problem in a moving bus with a less than optimal lighting situation. And therefore I ended up reading mostly in ebook format on my commutes, mostly on my phone. And I have a lot of great fantasy books in particular on my e-reader that I think will be great reads. However, fantasy books, I think, are not something that is great to read on short bus rides, also with a gap in the middle. So I change buses every day, twice every day on my commutes. So there's always this gap in the middle that provides a lot of distraction. And there's always definitely a lot of immersion, a lot of immersive feeling lost to this gap in the middle of my bus ride. So I didn't want to start any of the great fantasy books or sci-fi books on my e-reader either. And so I ended up reading mostly cheap popcorn entertainment on my commutes, or what I hoped would be popcorn entertainment, but which in a lot of cases turned out to be not even that, turned out to be lower quality even than expected. And so a lot of my reading time this year was lost to really underwhelming, low-quality books, I'm afraid. And I don't know how I'm going to remedy this situation, because, of course, this problem will persist into the new year, and I really have to maybe change my thinking, I don't know, about the immersive fantasy books, or I don't know, if you have any tips, let me know. Besides being the year of low quality, this year has also surprisingly turned out to be the year of reading French literature for me. I haven't read as much French literature as I read this year in a decade, if ever. I did read, for a time, I read a lot of scholarly French literature for my thesis. So I'm not completely out of the loop when it comes to the French language, but scholarly literature, of course, has a very different vocabulary, very different style and diction. And so reading fiction has been quite an adventure. Not sure if I'm going to keep this up in the new year. The books I read were L'étranger, The Stranger, or The Outsider in English by Camus. And I have to say, this might have been mind-blowing when it first came out in the 1940s, but for me nowadays, not so much. And then there was a contemporary novella called Un repas en hiver by Hubert Mingarelli. This is a supposedly profound piece about how German soldiers in the Second World War were actually human beings. Wow, mind well and truly blown. And then there was Carmen, which I read in preparation for the opera. This was actually very amusing. However, it had a really frustratingly long-winded frame narrative. And finally, there was Les Fleurs du Mal. These poems were surprisingly accessible to me because Baudelaire's imagery is heavily influenced by his classical education, and therefore it was familiar to me. This is the only one of the 4 French books that I've kept, and it was definitely my favorite of the bunch. This has also been the year of the quest for epic fantasy. Since the early summer, I have made an effort to find good new epic fantasy and high fantasy, new to me, that is. I used to read a lot more epic fantasy than I do nowadays. I've sort of fallen out of love with the genre in the last decade or so, because everything new that I seemed to pick up was really, really low quality, to put it nicely, or really dumb bullshit, to put it honestly. And I just couldn't be bothered anymore. I was done giving this genre a second chance, or second, third, fourth, fifth, etc. But then this summer I thought, no, come on, there's got to be good stuff out there. And I watched a few YouTube channels that really whetted my appetite for epic fantasy again. And so I started reading epic fantasy again, trying new authors. There is a lot more that I still want to try, a lot more authors that I want to try, and I think I'm going to make a TBR video specifically for fantasy books for 2024. But I've already made 2 great new author discoveries. New to me, of course. They aren't all that apocryphal, but I wasn't aware of them before. One of them is Daniel Abraham. He is most well known for being one half of the author duo James S.A. Corey, who wrote the Expanse novels. But he's actually a very prolific fantasy author, and I started reading his long prize quartet. I read A Shadow in Summer, and I'm going to read A Betrayal in Winter, this winter, and it's just really high quality, really thorough world building and character work in these novels, and I, at least in the first one, and I enjoyed it very much. The second new author discovery is Anthony Ryan. He is even more prolific, I think, than Daniel Abraham. He has several ongoing series, several completed series, and I started reading his novella series, The Seven Swords, the first novella being A Pilgrimage of Swords. I have now read 3 of the 5 novellas that have already been published. I assume there are going to be 7. And these are really great, really entertaining fantasy novellas, and they pack a lot of world building, a lot of character work into a very small amount of pages. The first book in particular feels a bit like a video game in the way that action sequences happen in very quick succession. However, the main character's very complicated and very dark backstory lends the story a certain gravitas as well. The second and third books feel more like pen and paper role-playing games. The first one an action-adventure, or the second one rather, and book 3 a murder mystery. They are really great, solid, epic fantasy, and I'm really curious to see what Anthony Ryan has done in his other series. So all told, the quest for epic fantasy was a success. And then this has also been the Year of Lanyon. She writes gay crime and romantic suspense for the most part, and I read the first book in her very famous Adrian English Mysteries series a few years ago. Was a bit underwhelmed, thought it felt a bit dated, and I read the first book in a series about an FBI hunt for a serial killer. Also that same year, I think, was a bit underwhelmed as well, so I thought that maybe she wasn't an author for me. But then at the very end of last year, I read a Christmas novella by her and absolutely loved it and thought I'd give her a second try. And I worked my way through, I don't know, maybe a third of her oeuvre, if as much, this year. She has published a ton of books, most of them self-published. And the thing about her mysteries is that they are actually great mysteries, in addition to being romance novels. The romances are, in fact, the part of her novels that frequently didn't work as well for me, but sometimes it did, and then it was a great combination. In particular, I recommend her series that starts with the Mermaid murders, which is a series of really great mystery and suspense novels, with also a really great romance in it. The last book in the series is, I think, scheduled to come out next year, and I really can't wait, in particular for the romance to resolve. So even though some of her books didn't work for me, I'm certainly going to continue reading her books next year. And now finally, for the end of the video, there is the issue of the bucket list to address. So late last year, I made a bucket list of 10 authors, each with an extensive backlist, an extensive oeuvre that to date I have read very little of, and that I want to read my way through in the course of the rest of my life. So I thought I'd quickly go through the list with you and see what progress I made, which authors I've read and which I haven't, and what books of theirs I'd like to read next. So author number 1 on that list is Cormac McCarthy, and I have not read a book by Cormac McCarthy this year. I really wanted to pick up The Crossing, but somehow didn't. Perhaps because I was afraid that it wouldn't hold up to book 1 in the series, which is All the Pretty Horses, which is my favorite of Cormac McCarthy's books that I've read so far. So I was a bit apprehensive. I just need to get over this. The next author is Patrick O'Brien, so in other words, the O'Brien-Maturin books. And I did read The Fortune of War this summer, which is book 6 in the series, and I'm afraid that it is my second least favorite book in the series, above or maybe even on par with book 5, which is Desolation Island. But even so, it is still a very good book. It contains the iconic Lesser of Two Evils scene, if nothing else, and these books are just really high-quality historical fiction, while still being great adventure stories and also really funny. The same is true for Dorothy Dunnett's books. Dorothy Dunnett is the next author on the list, and I read The Disorderly Nights, book 3 in the Lymond Chronicles this year. This was an absolute treat, as expected, but it was also a very stressful read. The first half of this book is set in the context of the conquest of Tripoli and the invasion of Malta in the 1550s by the Ottoman army. So that is, of course, not very nice to read. So there's a lot of brutality in the first half of the book. But in the second half, it doesn't really get better. In the second half, we are back in Scotland, and our dear Lymond is having one of his personal feuds. as he is wont to do, and this time it really escalates, and there's a lot of violence and brutality in the second half of the book as well. So this was a really tense and stressful read, but also again so funny, and just it's so refreshing to be reading quality historical fiction of such high quality. It's really unlike almost anything else. So Dorothy Dunnett, Patrick O'Brien and Mary Reynolds are kind of the holy trinity of historical fiction for me. Author number 4 is Patricia A. McKillip, and I am reading In the Forests of Serre right now. This is trademark McKillip in the way that she takes themes from folklore and from fairy tales and turns them into fantasy stories, but at the same time keeps the fairy tale character alive, and that makes these fantasy stories feel very ancient and also very mysterious. I'm loving it. Author number 5 is Barry Lopez, and I haven't read anything by him this year. In fact, I question his place on this list. It's not like I don't want to read anything by him ever again. His short story collection, Winter Counts, is one of the best short story collections that I've read, and I really do want to read Arctic Dreams soon. I'm just not that invested in the project of reading his whole backlist. I don't know if he really is an author for the rest of my life. He might be, I'm just not racing to find out. Author number 6 is Guy Gavriel Kay, and I have not read any Guy Gavriel Kay this year. I think this is mostly because the book by him that I most want to pick up, because it seems perfect for me, is this format, A Song for Arbonne, this huge, big chunker. I have been looking for other copies of this book, but they are very hard to get where I live. So I'm probably stuck with this edition, and this is just such a... It's almost like a workout even holding this book up, and it's just so discouraging. But 2024, I know, is going to be the year. Author number 7, Anthony Burgess. And yes, I read Nothing Like the Sun in summer. You might remember a few years ago I read A Dead Man in Deptford by Anthony Burgess, and that was the Christopher Marlowe book, and I absolutely loved it. And Nothing Like the Sun is, as you might have guessed, the Shakespeare book, and I absolutely despised it. He managed to make Shakespeare boring. It was appalling, really. It was just a very tedious tour de force from bullet point to bullet point in Shakespeare's biography. And it also robbed the character of all the brilliance that he obviously possessed. I really didn't recognize Shakespeare in this. The style was ambitious and full of Shakespearean or Shakespeare-like word coinages and generally the archaic vocabulary of the time, but it still just paled in comparison to the virtuosity of A Dead Man in Deptford. I'm considering kicking Burgess off this list. I, in fact, already got rid of another book by him that I had, which I don't even remember the title of now, something intent. It was a spy novel, and I really didn't want to read the female character in this one. I am still curious about A Clockwork Orange, and if there hadn't been the thing with the tiny font, I would already have read this book on my bus commute this year. Maybe I can squeeze it in somewhere in the coming year. And the last 3 authors are all ones that I haven't read this year. The first, author number 8 being E.M. Forster, author number 9 Dietmar Dart, who is a contemporary German author, and number 10, a classic German author, Hermann Hesse. Haven't read anything by any of them, but I still want to, and this is a long-term project anyway. I think all in all, at least in this regard, it has been a successful reading year. However, I am thinking of making an updated bucket list because I have 1 or 2 spots on this list that should maybe go to different authors than are currently on the list. So that's it for my reading reflections 2023. Even though it hasn't been the best of years, I am still going to make my top 10 best of the year 2023 video, but I think this year also calls for a reading resolutions video for 2024. So I'll see you again with these videos with all the good stuff at the end of the year. Happy holidays, guys. Take care. Bye.